Today's episode of What's the Big Idea is brought to you by Support. The coronavirus is testing schools, teachers, parents, students like few things ever have, and now's a great time to offer support if you can and ask for support if you need it. And I hope this episode gives you a little bit of that support, whether you need some ideas or whether you just need to hear another teacher's story for that comfort and that empathy. All right, on to the show. Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. What a week it has been. Coronavirus is spreading across the U.S. as our worried eyes look abroad to places like South Korea and Italy for signs of what might be coming. Schools are on the front line, with many closing on short notice, throwing students, teachers, and parents into uncharted territory. Many students are impacted in ways that are not even academic, such as school is their main food source, or their social lives, their mental health, and families are grappling with what to do when their child has to stay home and keep that social distance. Today's show is focused on learning, and it's based on the premise that your school or district is going online in some fashion. Now, I realize that this is simply not possible for many districts where connectivity is not a given for students. That question of equity of access is a topic I hope to examine later in the week. Okay, here's the rundown. First, you'll hear from Katie, a health teacher in Seattle who just went through the experience and uncertainty of her school being closed. I'm sure it will resonate with many of you, and for others, it could be a preview of things to come. Then I'll zoom out a bit with a short interview with Wade Millward. He's a reporter for EdSurge, and he's going to talk about the digital lay of the land in American schools. Finally, we'll hear from two teachers who are living through a school closure. Jillian and Maria are both teachers who normally use technology in really powerful ways, and they have some tips for school leaders and teachers who are taking the learning online. Now be sure to check out the show notes for the timestamps for each interview if you can't hear the whole thing. All right, now let's hear from Katie in Seattle. And I asked her to just start at the beginning. If we go back to the beginning of all of this, when did it become first apparent that your school district was going to be affected by the coronavirus?
It was probably around March 4th, March 5th in there. I can't remember the exact date, but when we first got notice that the school district just to the north of us, North Shore School District, had shut down. And that was huge. That was like nothing like that had really been on the radar or been discussed as far as a full shutdown. And so I think at that point we all kind of went, this might be coming our way, even though there was nothing official at that point.
Okay. And what was the sort of the mood, the tenor of the school with teachers and students once that happened, as you moved closer and closer to your own closure?
I think it was kind of surreal. I think we were still living our normal lives, but then had this sort of thing hanging out there that might or might not happen, and everyone was still really unsure. And so we just kept operating as normal, but with each day you would have maybe a couple less students in your class. The schools were developing a special code for students who were staying home just in preparation, preventative measures. So we had a new absence code that was specifically for families that were staying home preventatively. There were like little things starting to get put into place or talked about. But it was still a big unknown. Every day when I saw my students, I said, well, I may not see you tomorrow. I don't know. It can happen. May not see you tomorrow. So if that's the case, here's what I encourage you to do. Or, I will be emailing, be sure to check that. Those sorts of things. So it was very kind of this, just nobody knows. So sort of unsettling, taking one day at a time.
Wow. And was the school at that point asking teachers, was there any sort of centralized planning for, hey, if this happens, here's how we would like you to proceed learning wise?
No, it, nobody, I think, I mean, this was all new to the district too. So I'm sure that they were having plenty of conversations, but it wasn't anything that was, there was no plan in place yet. So we were all just kind of going by what we were hearing from teachers in other districts. So like North Shore School District to the north of us, um, they had put into place, they were doing online learning and it was still being graded, and it was to make it accessible to everyone and equitable. They were providing hotspots and um, computers that people could check out. So if students didn't have Wi-Fi home, they could come and get a Wi-Fi hotspot to be able to use. So they were trying to continue moving forward with their academic learning. And I think teachers, like some teachers were going into the building and actually literally teaching lessons from within their classroom, but online,
Mm.
and doing all that. And so we were just kind of trying to see, oh, is this what it's going to be like for us? But we didn't know.
So you had a day of training. Teachers get to come in for one day and get sort of a primer on what they should be doing.
Yeah, so that's where, so we went in, yes, we had no school Thursday, and they said we're treating this like a snow day, just a non work day. And then Friday we went in, and it was still, and I don't fault our administrator. Like everybody is doing the best they can and trying to figure this out. But basically, they said we're going, and the clarity they did have is, okay, so our government said, the state of Washington, we were shut down for 6 weeks, right? So we all knew by Friday we were gone, we were down for 6 weeks. And the day before, North Shore had been told by OSPI, our state public instruction, that they could not do what they were doing because of equity issues. So they could not continue the online teaching for grades. And
Uh,
so that's what they were trying to do. So that got shut down. So what we did know Friday for our planning is we knew that we had 6 weeks and that we needed to provide learning opportunities for students, but it couldn't be new learning basically, or required learning. Nothing could
mm.
be graded. That's kind of what we went into knowing, but we didn't know when we needed to have this by. Like, was this starting on Monday? There's a lot of clarity because like I think, I'm not sure if it was the governor where it was coming from, but that treat this coming week like a snow, like spring break. Like there was some mention of like the idea of moving up spring break. So like this coming week was supposed to be like spring break, so we'd have a week to figure everything out. Um, I still don't know when we're expected to push our stuff out and say here we go. So that's, those kind of timelines are still really vague.
Okay.
We are expected to go to work or to be online Monday and Tuesday. The furthest I know out is through Tuesday, 8 a.m. to noon. We are expected to be in our PCCs, our collaborative teams, and working together to continue the work that we started on Friday, the planning. And then I don't know from
And what's your sense of how teachers are coping right now? What sort of conversations are teachers having?
there. I think everyone is a little overwhelmed because of not knowing what this looks like and not knowing truly what the expectations are and truly what the guidelines are. And so this feeling of, so we're who are we creating this for? Are we creating this so that if we're audited, we're proving that we are earning what we're getting pay wise? Are we doing this to an expectation that students will actually do it? Are we creating this for the families so that families have something they can turn to for their students? You know, and then a lot of disappointment. Like, I mean, as teachers, we really value everything we're teaching. I feel like everything is so important, and
Yeah.
we don't have enough time as to teach everything. So then making those decisions on what do I cut, what do I do, um, and so, and then wondering if what we spend all this time creating will actually even get used.
Mm.
And how can we best use our time? And then we're strapped by our inability to use common social media, all the restrictions that we have to really connect with our students. Where our students, students are on Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube and media platforms like that, which we're not allowed to use. And so struggling with that, ways that we could be most creative, but are ways that are to reach students that maybe we're not even allowed to use. So
Wow.
that's kind of frustrating too.
Are your students all online? I mean, is that something that you can say with a lot of confidence that they can get online and see what you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So our district is 1-to-1. So every student has a computer provided by the district in the middle school and high school. And for not 100% students probably have access to Wi-Fi. So I don't know the exact percentages there, but in general, I would say 98, 99% of students, I would imagine, have access to Wi-Fi.
Okay. And any sense right now how your students are doing, what they're thinking and what are they worried? Are they anxious? Are they kind of excited? What's their feeling?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was thinking about that a lot when you were sending me the questions, and I really don't have a good temperature on that. I think all of us felt sort of like deer in the headlights, and so it was just we were sort of all navigating through this together, and I'm not sure where they're at. I know I have 2 middle schoolers, so my younger one, it was vacation, initially, and having to kind of bring her down from that and recognize, no, this is, we're still doing work. We're still going to be learning. We're going to take this as an opportunity to increase your learning and work on some of those things that you've struggled with. My 8th grader is, and actually, if you want to ask her any questions, you're welcome to. She is, I think, just kind of more gets it and is more aware that this is not, just a vacation.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much that varies with the age. I think students are apprehensive. I think they don't. It's really hard for people to take it seriously when society is sort of functioning as normal. And like what you and I were talking about earlier. And so I think the reality of it hasn't totally hit. I think students who are participating in sports, they're really struggling with that. When that's kind of their lifeline and these seasons are getting postponed, potentially canceled, I think they feel really unsure. I coach a high school varsity girls lacrosse team, and for me, that's been a lot of this navigation. What does this look like, and how do I, this is what these girls depend on and what they come to every day, and this is their health and wellness, and so what do we do with that when I can't meet with them and provide that for them? And then there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah, I worry a lot about just the mental health of the students as this goes on longer and longer.
Right.
I don't know how, how long can structure hold out, and how much your kid's going to be just kind of sitting around on social media, and that's not great. So you said that so this is not graded then. You are going to provide some kind of learning, but it's not graded, which I personally, I kind of agree with. I don't know how accountable we can really hold them, but do you feel like students will actually do work, will actually take part in the things you come up with?
That's the big question. And I think that as teachers is what we're really grappling with. And I think at least where I am at, and my school in particular, we're in a pretty affluent area. And I think along with parents working at home, I think that there's a high value on education. I think that students will be doing stuff. I would imagine for sure elementary, right? Parents are going to need their students doing stuff. Middle school, I would imagine that will carry through. High school might be a little tougher because you're dealing with, high school students, and that might be more of a battle. But and maybe I'm just being hopeful, I anticipate that it will be enacted. I don't, what else are they going to do? I don't know.
Sure.
If things get to the next stage as well as if we get fully shut down. But it really is hard to say. I mean, some families, I mean, we know people who are trying to go to Hawaii, so our families that have the ability to do that, just saying, hey, well, we're just going to make this a vacation and take it like that, and then not do the schooling. So honestly, it's really hard to say. And then how do we measure that? How do we know how many students are actually interacting with what we're putting out online? How many are actually doing that? And how can we get feedback on that? And so ask ourselves those questions as educators too. How can we best reach them? How can we make this engaging? And how can we know that they're doing it? So trying to figure those things out.
Yeah. Is the school using some kind of a common digital platform?
Yeah, so we have PowerSchool and OneNote are the things we use. And then as teachers, part of our training on Friday was in Microsoft Teams. So for all of us teachers to be able to access each other remotely.
Okay. So for a teacher or an administrator listening who senses this is coming to their school district, what recommendations would you have in terms of preparing for closure?
I think from the beginning until they've worked out a plan, being very upfront and clear and giving themselves time to come up with a clear plan before trying to enact anything, so that when the information comes out, it is clear and cohesive. So saying like, okay, we're going to take 5 days to do this. You can expect this on this date. Just providing enough time for teachers and for everyone to adjust. I think that was kind of the biggest challenge for us. We sort of spent a ton of time meeting on Friday trying to, okay, what's our plan gonna be? What are we gonna do? And come up with all this stuff. And then by the end of the day, and again, I don't fault our administration, our district, everybody's, in the social media, but it was the end of the day where they said, well, you have Monday and Tuesday. You don't need to have this out. So we were thinking in our minds, we have to have this out by Monday, and we want to have something good and ready to put out for students to do. And then it was, well, no, you're going to continue this work Monday, Tuesday. So that really shifted our brain. Then we're like, okay, we have a little more time. We could do a better job with this. But then we felt like we sort of, we would have just handled the day differently and planned differently.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, knowing how much time we had and when they wanted to enact this would have been really helpful.
Okay.
And saying that word to parents that teachers are working, we will have more information for you on this date, but know that, it's coming.
And you mentioned that you have your own kids, and I imagine a lot of teachers are going to be in this situation in their home trying to teach online, and however that looks, and they have their own families. How do you anticipate managing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel, I'm fortunate enough. My daughters are a little bit older, and we can provide. They can do a lot on their own. We're planning on. We're also fortunate to live really close to our school. So I think my husband, because he's a teacher as well, are both just planning on going into work in our isolated classroom, area to be able to work focused. But I know some of my teaching partners have younger kids, and I'm not sure what that's going to like. That's going to be a huge challenge. I do feel appreciated that I see on some of the Facebook communities, local communities I'm in, that some people are really acknowledging that about teachers and recognizing that that's going to be challenging for them. So I'm hoping that our school district will allow more flexibility in that. Like right now they said, 8 to noon on Monday and Tuesday, we have to be on Teams and be accessible and be available. And I'm thinking if I had 2 young kids at home, that would be really challenging.
Yeah.
So, but maybe I could say from 2 to 4, I'll be accessible, during nap time or downtime or whatever, or maybe in the evenings. And so I'm hoping that they'll move towards a more flexible time, and where teachers could even say, here are my office hours, put that out and say, I will be available for questions, emails, interacting, during this time.
Yeah.
Also, 8 to noon, how many high school students are up then?
Did the school provide any structure to the students in terms of, here's a suggested day, starting learning at such and such time until, or is it just sort of?
I think that is all, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And so, coming back to your question earlier about how students are feeling, I mean, I would imagine they're not feeling that much different than we are. Like, what is this going to look like? What's going on? I'm not sure. I think there's all that uncertainty. And so I think they're probably feeling very, at least for high school students, feeling very similar to us, unsure, a bit afraid, and confused, and, just sort of apprehensive about what's next.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Katie, I'd like to thank you for joining me today and offering your thoughts and insights.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Katie for that honesty and genuineness. You could hear a lot of uncertainty in her responses as she, like so many teachers out there, struggles with this new reality. One big thing that stood out to me from our conversation, her district is not giving grades for the work students complete during this time. And that's a big thing that districts will need to wrestle with. Personally, I agree with that decision. I don't think grades are going to be a particularly meaningful thing when teachers and students have no direct daily contact. Okay, now let's hear from Wade Millward. Wade writes for EdSurge, which reports on the people, ideas, and technologies shaping learning. And they currently have a great online guide posted now called Navigating Uncertain Times, How Schools Can Cope with Coronavirus. And it's full of articles and tips and checklists that could be helpful for your school. All right, I'm happy to be joined on the podcast now by Wade Millward, a business reporter for EdSurge. And Wade, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Before we get to the specifics of the current situation, could you give my listeners a bit of background and kind of tell me what the landscape of online learning is like generally in schools today?
Yeah, definitely. So I have worked with EdSurge for about a year now, and the state of online learning is very vast and varied, really. You have everything from whole companies offering to administer classes through online means, whether that's homework assignments through an online portal, tests. I see a lot more companies using video in terms of so that educators can lecture remotely. You've seen them even kind of use different tools available online for the creation of portfolios and for homework assignments. So the world of learning online is definitely much more vast than, when we think about kind of the last time this happened. I've been trying to think of a fair comparison, and I think the H1N1 outbreak in 2009 seems kind of like a fair comparison in terms of a lot of school districts closing down. But to think about the tools for learning online that we have today versus back then, it kind of feels like a different world to to be bullish on online learning. Yeah.
What are the most popular platforms? What do you come across the most in your reporting?
Yeah, so with EdSurge, I cover the business side of education. So I cover all grade. I cover K through 12. I cover higher education, and we've even been expanding into workforce-related learning. On a separate note, that is just a trend we see with ed tech companies kind of looking into this kind of lifelong learning, this idea that you are learning in different phases of life and seeing how they can kind of get into the corporate learning market. But popular tools out there. I mean, schools have their learning management systems, right, where you can administer, where students can see their classes and can receive homework assignments. And I believe a lot of them will help with, sort of logistical scheduling sort of things. Student information systems, right, where you have your student rosters. And so if I had to lump those two into a broader category, you have these tools for the management of students, right? It's 2020, so a student is, they are a name, they are an age, they are an individual an IEP, an individual education plan. Sometimes they are, they are their grades, and how do you communicate with their parents? So to put that into a broader category, you have these tools for data management, right? And the administering of data, sharing grades with parents, sharing work with parents. Sometimes you see those as one tool. Sometimes you see folks try to break out and make the best possible tool out of one particular widget, right? You see some supplementary tools out there to help with individual subjects. I've seen things that range from like voice to text software being used to measure how well students are reading. I've seen things that will give different reading materials at different lexile levels so that students in a classroom can learn at the same time. Yeah.
So pretty comprehensive tools.
Yeah.
Safe to say. Yeah. Do you feel like when the current situation started, and really in the last week or two, it's accelerated greatly with schools deciding almost the day before that they need to close? Do you think schools were ready for this? And even though a lot of schools are using online tools, were they in a position to move to those quickly?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've had this discussion with my colleagues a lot. Should we be impressed by what we've been seeing in terms of how quickly some districts have mobilized? Should we be worried that it has taken so long for many other districts to even decide what they're going to do? But it might be something we have to look back on. I'm sure there are, and I guess it is striking how individual, district by district this is. It kind of reflects, we at EdSurge, we do look at school systems in other countries as well. So it is interesting that here in the U.S., right, we kind of pride ourselves on having a district by district, a very decentralized school system. And I guess where you can run into issues with that is now every single geography in the country has a different plan, a different response to when they have to do something like this. And fortunately for us, this doesn't happen. This doesn't come up a whole lot. School districts that deal with natural disasters a lot more, they are more ready for something like this. I grew up in Florida, so hurricanes, right, have prepared a lot of those school districts for closing down and switching to an online learning component. Louisiana, right, with hurricanes, areas that get a lot of snow days, so tornadoes, yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that last point you made. I found some really excellent resources from schools in Japan, for example, that clearly have dealt with crises before. What about expectation setting? I feel like a lot of the debate online and in schools is sort of swinging back and forth between, online learning can replicate most of what you do in the classroom, and then it swings to, it's ridiculous to think that it can even approach learning in the classroom. How can schools set expectations? What communication should schools be giving parents and families about what they can expect online?
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that from the company's perspective too. Whenever I interact with them, their messaging, if you will, they want to make sure that they are not broadcasting the message that they want to replace teachers. I feel like if you go back years, that's what EdTech was going to replace the in-classroom experience. But nowadays, I think a lot of the companies want to be seen as augmenting or in step with the in-classroom experience. So you have these things like I was trying to describe before, the kind of administrative data management software. That's not going to replace a teacher, or pedagogy. Right. Yeah. That really is just a logistical easing of teacher, things that would have required teachers' time. They now have the time to concentrate on lesson plans in their classroom. You see that with a lot of supplementary companies that offer supplementary materials. They frame it from the perspective of, we're not trying to replace you reading to your students, you using the whiteboard. We are merely trying to save you time in terms of creating questions. You know, OER is so big now, right? Open Education Resources. We want to give you a means to access, you know, just things that would have been time consuming, if it's writing questions, if it's finding word problems. So you see folks talking about it from that perspective, but the idea of you're sitting face to face with a student and you are helping them figure out their learning style or overcoming their obstacle to learning. That's, I think a lot of companies recognize that that's really hard to replicate at a distance, you know, through a computer screen or through video. You know, it's in 2020 and in a lot of tech businesses, just face to face is, you know, it's still the best way sometimes.
Do you think the this current situation with the coronavirus, could it have long-lasting impact on education, a change in education? That's, a lot of schools are now going to be forced to make such a hard push to online learning. Could you see it changing actually the way schools approach learning?
So some of the answer depends on how long is this going to last, right? Which everybody
Absolutely.
in every industry ever is watching this, wondering, hey, when are we going to get the vaccine that finally calms the markets, calms people, gets them feeling comfortable traveling again? And it might be some time. So, you know, schools will, if they don't already have a policy in place, they're either writing it right now, or they will you know, go back and make the changes accordingly. And I've even seen some I've seen some online posts from folks saying, hey, we don't have to look at online learning when all of a sudden there's a huge, you know, a huge worldwide disaster. Certainly this is helpful for your students with disabilities. This is helpful for your students who do not learn best in, you know, a crowded classroom or in person or what have you, you know. So it makes me wonder if experiencing this might make some educators that have never experienced online learning say, wow, you know, I actually was able to save time doing this, and this was a great experience. If this is their first foray into online learning and they find it to be very stressful and you know, done under duress, hopefully it doesn't deter them from ever trying another tool again, though I'm sure we can see that that effect. So yeah, education, and you know, we've studied education for so long, and all we keep seeing is how individual education is from the learner's perspective, and I think from the educator's perspective too.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
enough.
And the last thing, I'm wondering about the companies that create online educational programs and software. They stand to do pretty well right now, I think.
Good question. Before we got on the call, I messaged some folks, some investors in the space, and I keep hearing, you know, a lot of inquiries, a lot of messages from school districts that are curious about, hey, what is remote learning with a video-based service look like? So I am not sure yet if those inquiries have turned into paying customers. You know, I think a lot of companies, you know, this is a very competitive landscape, right? Even though education and online education, there are a variety of tools and a variety of ways to do that. It's still very competitive in the sense of who is going to be the name brand to rule that tool. So a lot of them have been pretty mum about, we're getting a lot of money right now. Also, I think there's a little bit of the, you know, how does this appear to the public? If you're a company, you don't necessarily want to look like, oh, I'm benefiting off of this, off of a disaster, you know, a worldwide panic. But I do appreciate some of the messaging coming from them. A lot of them have been offering free tools, free training for teachers that are curious about how this works. Probably some discounting is going on right now. So if nothing else, maybe this is an opportunity for educators to see what a tool would be like, you know, even if their school district does not close down. Maybe if they were ever curious about bringing something into the classroom, this is a time to read more on it and a time to experiment. But, you know, everybody is dealing with something different right now. If you need if you need a tool right now, or you need to brush up on what your school district's tools are, your vendor probably has a trainer to help you. And I think that's probably a really important note, is that if any educators out there are feeling very confused or lonely or isolated, they probably should talk to their school, the chief information officer of their school. The title varies, but they probably should feel comfortable asking, what do we have? I have these things coming up. What tools do we have at our disposal? What licenses do we have? And I don't feel comfortable doing this. Is there any way I can get some training on it? I respect our educators' times are very, very, very tight. But I think it's good to be prepared and to feel comfortable speaking with someone about what your thoughts are. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said that very well, that this will definitely provide an opportunity for a lot of teachers. And that may be one of the highlights that comes out of all of this, that some teachers learn something that they didn't know before, add something to their toolkit, and maybe become better teachers in the process. Wade, I'd like to thank you so much for giving us this context today.
Thank you.
Now you'll hear from a couple of teachers who normally integrate technology into their classrooms in really meaningful ways. And so they were naturally positioned to help the school, help their colleagues and themselves move to the online environment as the school closes for the coronavirus. They're going to share some great tips about managing student work, communicating with students, and keeping the learning as authentic and meaningful as possible. All right, I'm joined now on the podcast by two teachers who are not only tech savvy and have a lot of words of wisdom about using technology for online learning, they're also living it right now as their school is going through being closed down by the coronavirus. Jillian and Maria, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we get into the current situation with the coronavirus and all the school closures, could you talk first a bit about how you use technology already? What tools are you using, and what does digital learning look like in your class?
Well, for me, it's mostly using the Google Suite, especially Google Classroom. It's the way that I've always communicated with my students. I post my assignments there. The project outlines are always there. I have a timeline that breaks the project into the days that I see them, because I'm an arts teacher, so I don't see them every single day of the cycle. So in order for me to ensure that they know what they're doing in case they miss something, I create a timeline there where they can check what we did in class if they weren't there, or if they're behind, for them to understand that they're behind and be proactive about it. I feel it has worked for me really well throughout this last 4 years, and I really recommend it.
I use similar platforms in similar ways. I host a Google Classroom for all the sections of my math class, and in it I include not just my assignments, but all of my outlines and presentation slides for every class that I teach. So for every week, there'll be day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on, and it'll have the daily warm-up in it. It'll have some inquiry. It'll have guided practice. So at the end of the week, students can look back and they have access to all of those slides to either review on their own, or there'll also be additional PDF attachments with guided note templates in case if they're absent, they can fill those in. So there's a lot of different resources and tools, but Google Classroom is the hub that they all use to access everything.
Yeah. And you talk about that students can review, students can make up work they missed. What other reasons do we have? We see our students most days. What are the real advantages in just a normal setting, non-coronavirus setting, to using technology like this?
Well, I think it allows you to curate resources on behalf of students. I think one of it's both a blessing and a curse with having all of this information at our fingertips. I think the students have a hard time sometimes sort of going through all of that and knowing what to use and access. So in the case of math, I mean, there's a million tutorials on any given topic. So this gives us a place where we can curate that content and then host it there, and the students know that they can always these are videos that are going to be useful, kind of get to the point, or really well illustrate the teaching point that you're trying to make that day. So
yeah, and it's funny because you teach sixth grade. I teach sixth grade in design technology, but I also teach eighth graders in art, and I use Classroom always, and regardless of the subject that I teach. So I do know those struggles of them not being quite there yet, like independent enough to look for these resources in Classroom. But I also see the eighth graders that have been exposed to this platform for a couple of years, and it does make them accountable for their own learning, and it makes them independent. So, and it's also really easy for me to structure the lessons when I can, when a kid comes to me and says, hey, I missed class, I immediately redirect them to Google Classroom instead of, like going through the same conversation over and over again.
And now schools are closing, and kids are going to be at home and largely expected to continue learning with teacher guidance. What are some general tips you would give, or ways that you think we can support students, not just academically, but also emotionally, throughout this process, whether it lasts a week or whether it lasts 4 weeks?
I'd say that the first thing is that thinking about what the unique value is that we provide to students within the classroom setting, and that is probably connection. The teacher connecting with the students and the students connecting with one another. And so if we're going to be doing a remote learning situation, that element is gone. So how do we replicate that in a digital format? So I think thinking about how we can mindfully try to keep that connection alive. So rather than let's say using one of those pre-made videos that are already there, maybe instead you create that content yourself, and so students have they have that, they hear your voice, see your face. Maybe having some sort of platform where students are able to interact with one another. Maybe that's like a FaceTime chat where they're conversing about something, presumably not your entire class, but maybe in smaller groups. Never. Yeah. But where they have that exchange of ideas and that dialogue, that back and forth, because that interplay is so important. I mean, you don't want to then just create your learning where it's going in one direction, where you're just producing things that they're consuming. There needs to be interplay. So
yeah. I feel like academically, for me, would be those connections that you mentioned. For me, that would look as constant communication with them. It can be in the form of a video or an email or a chat, something where we can stay connected, and constantly giving them feedback on their own projects. So, for example, tips for that is have an iPad. Because with an iPad, you can easily, check things out, circle stuff, especially when you're working in design or in art, that the writing component, the pen and pencil, the pencil and paper, is super important. An iPad is a really good tool that it's there for you to it's really user-friendly. And emotional support, I think that's a really tough one, because not having them there, physically there, it's really difficult to know whether they're struggling or not. But however, I have had students where their feelings are coming out in art projects. So I have this example, an Asian American student, and he had we were involved in the Doodle for Google contest, and this year their prompt was kindness. So how can you show kindness, or what does kindness mean to you? And I have his artist statement here, and he named his piece Empty Streets. And he says that the big idea behind his piece is that there isn't enough kindness in the world, and especially in times like this with the COVID-19.
Wow.
Yeah. So he says that, I'm going to quote him, "I think that we should be nicer to each other and spreading kindness. The orange gradients in my artwork symbolize the warmth of the street, the warmth that the streets used to have. Now the streets are empty and alone. I want to convey the message that we should be more kind to, that people should be kind to one another, because we're all human beings." And so, yeah, I'm not going to read the rest because it makes me a little emotional.
Yeah, I was thinking of, in terms of the importance of keeping the arts during these remote learning sessions. I think a lot of schools might be under pressure. We've only got limited time, limited resources. Let's make sure math gets done. Let's make sure English gets done, maybe science. And they might be squeezing out other subjects. And Maria, your example is why art should definitely not be squeezed out right now. Maybe now would be a good time to talk for any administrator listening. How can school leaders support teachers right now as they're either about to transition to online learning, they're in the middle of it, or maybe they're just thinking about it?
I think, kind of repeating what I said previously, is giving a bit of latitude in the what, knowing that what it is that we're teaching, knowing that the how is changing so dramatically. So as that is going to look inherently different in a remote learning environment, having the freedom and latitude to kind of do different things. Maybe that means a less is more approach to curriculum.
We basically have a week of professional development and offering those opportunities and differentiating between teachers and, like helping them get to the point where they can get. I feel like that is an important support system that the school has in place for us. I have said it multiple times that I really appreciate how they're not forcing us to go through one specific platform or everyone needs to have the knowledge to operate this software or etc. Because I know that there are many teachers out there that don't feel equipped to take in this challenge. So yeah, I think we are in a really good place in the school that we worked at, and I think that that's because of the efforts of our admin team as well.
So teachers are now planning how to help students continue their learning, to deliver content skills and have students practice those. What are some essential tools? We talked about Google Classroom, which I think probably most listeners are familiar with, if not already using. Could each of you talk about one online tool, an application, program that you think maybe isn't as well known by educators, but is really powerful in an online learning environment?
First, I think we can't say enough good things about just all the G Suite things. So forms, slides, docs, like all of that works seamlessly. And if you're not currently using it, now's a great time to start. But then outside of that realm, there's a couple of apps that I really like that kind of do the same thing, sort of like an interactive whiteboard where you can video record yourself. So the two that I'm familiar with there's Everything Explained and then also Educreations. And you can just demo anything. So you're video recording yourself as you're writing on the board. You can import photos, PDFs. You can crop and resize things. I've already started creating a bank of videos for my students just to repeat, previous content, just like going over that practice problem and then showing it one more time with, this is how you do this diagram. This is how you solve it algebraically. This is how, it's just the different ways that you can solve problems. So,
and back to an earlier point you made, a lot of that content might already be part of Khan Academy.
Oh, certainly.
But you're doing it because...
Yeah, because I think that personalization of your teacher creating it for you, there's that familiarity. The students know your voice, they know your style, they're going to be hearing just like that familiar way that you phrase something. Or I think especially with in math, like there's there's so many different models of how to solve things. And going to Khan Academy, and I don't mean to knock it. I mean, it's a great platform, but you don't know which one that they're going to be teaching or using, and this allows you to then say, okay, this is the visual method that we were doing in class previously, so this is the one I'm going to show you again, and here's a couple others. Whereas going to a different place, they may show you in a completely different way, and yeah, that may be confounding or difficult.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I obviously don't teach math, but it works exactly the same for me in design technology. When right now we're actually with some students starting to learn Photoshop and Illustrator, and I always compare those programs to math in the sense that there are multiple ways to get to a point. It's not black and white. So when I teach those platforms or that software, I would like my students to be able to listen to me and not go to a tutorial in YouTube where they might get a bit confused because the way that person is doing it is very different from the way I teach it. So I really strongly feel that they should see us and hear us. And I'm excited to see how that really is going to look like in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, the one that jumps out at me, super easy and largely free, although I think you can upgrade. There's an app called Screencastify that goes with Google, and it just does screen recordings, and teachers can record themselves. They can record just their voice with their screen. They can have their face in the corner of the screen as they're talking, and it's a great way to, like you said, the kids get to hear your mannerisms and maybe your sense of humor, and it just personalizes when you need to do content delivery.
Yeah, and just to echo that, when I taught in a fourth grade class previously, I remember I had a student who was out for an extended period of time due to an illness, and so he was doing a lot of his work from home, and I used Screencastify to give him feedback on an essay. So the student took a photo of what he had written, he emailed it to me, and then I pulled up the image, and then I gave him evaluative feedback on literally like annotating his essay and telling him with the audio recording of, I liked your introduction, this was a great transition sentence. And I remember the feedback that the parents gave me on that. They just were so appreciative because it was very personalized. The student didn't feel like they were missing out on anything. It was just like having that one-on-one conference that you would have with your student in the classroom, but then it's just done digitally. So yeah, it looks a little bit different, but these tools and resources are surprisingly easy to use. And if you just get over the hurdle of this is a scary new thing and you try it out, you realize you can actually get through a lot of content. Like like your entire classroom giving personalized feedback, you might be able to do that digitally, and you probably wouldn't even have been able to do that in the classroom.
We know that in teaching, sometimes a powerful tool is the non-example. What are the non-examples here? What should schools and teachers avoid as they move to online platforms or online learning?
I think just the mindless attachment of worksheets. I think just like
and you mean
just
as in like
providing just
uploading a worksheet to Google Classroom?
Yeah, just saying, okay, we're going to be learning remotely indefinitely, so here's a digital packet of 20 things. I think that could be sort of a slippery slope situation.
Yeah, for me it would be mostly modeling behaviors, not freaking out, or at least if you are not showing that to your students because they are already going through so much right now. I feel like we are always asking our students to be resilient, to be open-minded, to have a growth mindset. So I feel like we should take this as an opportunity to model those behaviors. And I know that they definitely learn from watching us and seeing our processes. So I would say that that's an important one for me.
Do you worry that, I guess what I'm thinking here is student wellness when they're at home and screen exposure? And I guess I'm thinking more of the mental health aspect.
Yeah.
Students, school's a social place. They come, even if they use devices at school, which they do sometimes, they're with their friends. There's that talking, and now it's going to be a lot of screen time. In addition to whatever screen time they might normally have, this Netflix is going to be on, and Fortnite or whatever. You worried all about that? How the kids are going to be functioning at home?
Yeah, I would for sure. But I think that's why it's so important for schools to be providing parents with just sample schedules of what their day might look like, and then saying, X number of hours should be devoted to schoolwork, of which this number of hours would be then screen time. And then the rest of the time, it doesn't mean you're then doing your own free screen time. It might mean that you are outdoors, or maybe you're playing a game, or you're reading a book, or you're just kind of outlining what that might look like, just because you do run the risk of it being if both of your work and play is on the same device, then ends up being you now have 12 hours of device.
Yeah.
Right. I think providing our families with resources on how to get your children out of the screen and into the real world, if you would say, are really important. Just the document that they were showing us this morning with basic guidelines on how do you do this at home. I think it's important for parents who are, I try and put myself in their situations, and all of a sudden they have been told that their kid needs to stay at home, and they probably have to go to work, or like we don't know what the circumstances in each family are, and I think most of them are not thinking on those details that we think about. So providing them with those resources, I feel, is really important.
Yeah. A lot of schools have shared their experiences, which has made it easier for others. Maria and Jill, thanks so much for joining me today and giving these excellent insights.
Thank you, Dan.
This is largely an unprecedented event for American schools, as we struggle with how to keep students engaged and learning in the face of having to close our doors and keep social distance. A big thanks to my guests today, Katie, Wade, Maria, and Jillian, for offering those insights. And for you listening at home, I hope this helped. I hope this gave you some ideas. I hope it comforted you if you're going through this right now. But support is the main point here. And if you have comments, questions, your own stories to share, we're on Twitter at BigIdeaEd. Please post a comment, reply to the tweets I've been putting out with this episode, and we'll retweet them and get them out there so that teachers can hear as many voices as possible as we walk into the fog. And it really does feel like a fog, like we don't know what's ahead. We're just kind of walking forward and doing the best we can. Thanks for checking out What's the Big Idea. See you next time.